Hey, welcome. Good morning. We are talking about something a little bit controversial this morning, a little bit fun. And that is that last Tuesday, the 8th of December, today is the 16th, CentOS, well, let me start over. Rich Bowen, who's the community manager for CentOS, and Chris Wright, who's the CTO at Red Hat, announced that CentOS will be end of life as of the end of 2021. We've got a couple of articles, we've got their original announcements. We kind of want to open this one up more to discussion. I'm saying we because my colleague Dan Finneran, hello, David Mackay. My colleague Dan Finneran is joining me live, and I have no idea. How much you know about CentOS or anything. I was just like, you know what? This morning's stream is better as a conversation, and I really would love to have someone. And Dan just happened to get online 5 minutes ago, so he's the first guy that's joining me. Thanks so much.
Yeah, no problem.
Do you have any experience with?
Oh, could you repeat that? You broke up a little bit then.
Yeah, I am. Oh, good times. Better? Let me check my Wi-Fi, make sure I'm on the... Oh, I'm not on the right one at all. Okay, this might break.
Give it a minute or so, and then hopefully rain will reappear.
Yeah, I'm so... Yeah.
Two rains now.
Yeah. Woo. Oh, yeah. So Mackay was like, you should start telling jokes, Dan.
Okay.
All right. So my laptop updated last night and apparently thought that the house Wi-Fi, which is in a different building, was the most reliable. I fixed that.
Right. Very random.
So,
yes.
What's your experience with CentOS? If anything, it's no big deal either way.
Sure. Yeah. So in previous lives, I've managed large Linux farms in enterprise. So we've in most places generally operated a combination of large amounts of RHEL servers for the production kind of sites where you needed that level of support and you needed service level agreements. And then for kind of other areas of the infrastructure kind of development, testing, QA, other areas where we needed basically something that was comparable, we typically been running large fleets of CentOS VMs. So, last week's announcement is really going to start to be where that sort of use case is kind of going to be a big issue.
Yeah. And I talked about it briefly with a couple of members of our community. It came up on our community Equinix Metal Slack. Basically, they posted one of our community members, Fun Times, is his nick. He posted a link to the Ars posting. Let me do a quick screen share on that one. And I had seen it before, and I read over it. It's kind of dramatic,
Yes.
which is understandable because that sells. But but yeah, it's kind of dramatic. The actual announcements from Chris Wright and Rich Bowen are a lot more chill. They're basically like, look, we'd like you to use Stream instead, and CentOS is not meant to be a replacement, was ultimately their story. And on our community, we had like 3 or 4 of us were actually talking about it, and somebody mentioned, this is open source, so you get what you pay for. And that's,
CentOS has been was originally kind of developed outside of Red Hat, and then they took the CentOS team in-house 6 years ago or so, and it's basically become a staple distro for so many people. That this switch, I think, whilst there's already the uproar at the moment, but come next year, when all of a sudden having or not having the capability of running something that is almost binary identical to the paid subscription RHEL licensed OS, that leaves you in a funny position in that you either pay a lot of money now to develop on something that matches the production environment that's supported, or ultimately now you run the risk of developing on something that doesn't match, and then when it's Friday and you have to push to production, because that's the only day that you are actually allowed to push to production whilst eating pineapple topped pizza, that's the point where you'll find out that things aren't working as expected. And this is kind of the crux of the issue. I suppose the other kind of thing is so they've announced the replacement, or I guess CentOS Streams existed for a while. I've never really come across it because I don't know why I'd ever want to use it, but there is. But what is CentOS Stream? What is it? What are you going to get with it? How stable is it? What can you use it for? And how's that going to compare with when you need to move from CentOS Stream to RHEL? There's quite a lot of unknowns there.
Well, I think ultimately, and this is, I should probably qualify this. I was with Red Hat for 11 years. I was the RDO community manager, and that meant that Rich Bowen, as the CentOS manager, and we worked very closely together. RDO is OpenStack branded for with RPMs and installation and whatnot, and so we very much care what operating system was underneath us, and we would package for CentOS and RHEL. That said, the whole, I had this little conversation with our community, late last week, early this week, but then it didn't really occur to me to talk about this today until last night. A friend of mine from the RDO community who has a lot of systems using CentOS and RDO reached out, and he was like, who do I need to talk to? And I was like, oh, yeah, let's talk about this morning. So, yeah, I agree with Mackay. I think this is
controversial.
So the developer program within Red Hat had a really strong start, also about 6 years ago. And then it kind of coasted without enthusiasm for a couple of years. And then the past 2 years, it's had a lot of push to, but I also, I actually agree with this statement of Mackay's. It's that the developer community was really distrustful of IBM IBM's acquisition of Red Hat, and there was a lot of like, and this was on top of Red Hat acquiring CentOS, and this was, so there's already distrust there. But I felt like when they announced CentOS Stream last year that they were pretty much saying that this would happen.
Okay.
I actually did not, like Rich and I did not have a private behind the scene conversation about this. I just assumed. Now to answer your question.
Oh, sorry.
Say again.
I forgive my ignorance here. Where does this kind of leave Fedora?
Okay, so Fedora is all right. Let's back it up. So Fedora is a 6-month release cycle, much shorter, much more bleeding edge. If you were to compare RHEL to Stream to CentOS to Fedora, it would be more like Fedora is the very beginning of the release cycle, the bleeding edge, the features that are just making a mess and having fun. That's Fedora. And every couple of cycles, then RHEL comes in and goes, okay, what has worked for the past 2 or 3 cycles? What is stable? What is solid? What are the customers demanding? And then take from that, and it becomes RHEL. Mm-hmm. What Stream is meant to do is be the in-between Fedora and RHEL. So CentOS would just take RHEL and rebrand it. That's it.
Okay.
But Stream is meant to be kind of, okay, we've got these 2 or 3 cycles of Fedora. There's a mess, there's experiments, there's fun times. What of these works for people? And what do people live want to play with? This is what it might look like. Play with it. It's kind of like RHEL Alpha is what CentOS Stream is.
Right. Okay. It's just confusing. Yeah. And then I just kind of randomly popped into my head was a acquisition of CoreOS like 2 years ago. So there's
that was more around the container space. The purpose of that was more around container space and whatnot, and the mind share of containers.
But I mean, that still led to. I'm sorry, I'm kind of researching the background here. Red Hat Container Operating, Red Hat RHEL CoreOS or RHCOS. So there's RHEL, there's RHCOS, there's CentOS Stream, there's Fedora, and now there's CentOS End of Life.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Plenty of options.
And here's Mackay confirms they killed CoreOS too. I feel like now I don't follow CoreOS as much. I will confirm, but I felt like CoreOS kind of still has an upstream presence, whereas CentOS upstream presence, it's still there. And to me, my question for like the CentOS people, not like Red Hat CentOS employees, but the people using CentOS, like what's to stop that community from taking the RHEL bits and rebranding? Like, of course, the original developers who did that, they're mostly Red Hat employees now, so they're not going to do that. But why can't other people?
I believe that has kind of started to happen now. One of the original CentOS people, in a moment of rare stupidity, I started browsing the Orange site and kind of noticed that there was some very, very contentious arguments going on around CentOS and things like that. But on there was also a mention that one of the original CentOS people had essentially started again, but with a completely different name. And basically, here we are again with CentOS version 2 under a different name, where they're effectively going down the same path again, which is good for the CentOS community if it takes off. They do have an option there that hopefully they will be able to get that sort of parity to work on again.
Yeah, the thing is that agreed with Makai again. He's saying everything that's on my mind. The container teams working on Podman and Builder are doing great. It's just the operating systems that are getting confusing. It's very confusing. Actually, as a former Red Hatter, like keeping track of all the products, I will say that I was quite happy to jump from frontline support, where I was expected to know of all of the products, to engineering, specializing in OpenStack. I was like, yes, this is my knowledge cube right here. Now I had no idea how complicated OpenStack was, but it felt good at the time. But yeah, it's chaos, and it's scary for someone who's built an entire CentOS.
Yeah,
space.
I mean, I think there's a huge amount of upheaval kind of going to come out of this. There's, CI/CD systems that are sat building day in, day out on CentOS, producing code that is pretty much guaranteed to run on RHEL. That will all need rebuilding. There are people who base all of their container images and things like that on the hub approved, whatever, CentOS base images and things like that. There are, huge amounts of, there are going to be various companies, various open source projects that are all making use of CentOS as, kind of their primary platforms. Now they're kind of not really left with a great deal of options. They either wait for these replacement products to mature, hopefully very quickly, or they have to make relatively large changes to different distros. And things like Ubuntu, which are huge distros and massively used. There's quite large differences between CentOS and Ubuntu, in that Ubuntu is relatively much faster moving distribution. Its kernel is much newer. It tends to have a lot more packages. The systems that it uses are completely different. There's a lot of breakages that are going to happen, quite possibly, when people flip from one distro to another.
And the thing is that when people come to me and they're like, I want to try Linux for the first time, and I'm like, so where are you coming from? Are you coming from Windows? Are you coming from Mac? And typically I tell them to go to Ubuntu first. And the reason for that is it just works. And Makai is correct. It doesn't use RPM or Yum. It uses apt-get, I think.
Yeah.
But the thing is that Ubuntu is really greatly streamlined for desktop use, for a noob, for a developer, but for servers, it's not as, it doesn't just work the same. And maybe they'll be there now through demand.
Canonical must be rubbing their little hands together with this. I mean, it's just a huge push. And the one other thing which is kind of crazy is, I correct me if I'm wrong here, but they changed the end of life date on the last version of CentOS. They kind of brought that forward.
Yeah, by a lot. So
which massively pulls the rug from everybody.
Yeah. So each major version is supposed to have approximately a 10-year life cycle, and RHEL 8 just released last year, maybe the year before. It's been 2020 means my sense of time is completely fucked. But RHEL 8 was recent.
Yes.
its end of life for RHEL is 10 years from then, and for CentOS 8 it will be end of next year, which is only 2 years. There was an option called Scientific Linux, which was similar to CentOS in that it was rebranded RHEL, and big companies like CERN and Fermilab and companies that you know and love for doing academic research and whatnot, they would use Scientific Linux. But that was ended in 2018, 2019, I believe, as well.
I'm starting to think that we're being pushed towards the Oracle Linux at this point. We're back into the Larry Ellison fold.
This is a family show, sir.
Right. I will wash my mouth out with sir.
I hope not. Now, there are things that also bring me hope, which if you read, let me just switch my screen. There's in Chris Wright's announcement, he specifically says three. Where are you? Oh, okay. I was exploring. He specifically announces, this is Rich Bowen's announcement is linked directly, and it's kind of generic. He goes into, there's the actual end of life 2021. There's a FAQ, but here is Chris Wright's announcement. And one of the things that I love about it is it specifically goes into what 3 options there are for people who aren't comfortable with CentOS Stream. Fedora, the Red Hat Universal Base Image, is more like a operating system for a container. It's stripped down and simplified. And then the Red Hat Developer Subscription, which is really good for an individual because it's absolutely free and it means you get to use RHEL. But it's definitely not going to be a viable replacement for people who are using, for CERN, for example, who has a million cores, And I hope that Red Hat thought about that before doing this, and I wonder what they're thinking.
I think they're probably ringing up CERN going, don't worry, you can use RHEL. All you'll need to do is write us a really, really big check.
Yeah, academics don't have those really big checks,
especially
now.
This is the thing. I mean, people are being pushed into a corner here with they either huge amounts of upheaval to replatform, test, prove, and move back into production in a 1-year window.
And it's this, like, to me, like 2020, really? Did we have to do it this year? Did we have to do this announcement this year? Couldn't we have, been like, okay, we're going to end of life 2021? So much badness. I wish at least it was 2 years, because it seems like 1 year is just the beginning of a development cycle of that scale.
Yeah.
You're just starting to roll it out on your first few and test. And when you're talking about 1 million cores, that's a multi-year switch. Even if you wanted to go from CentOS to RHEL or CentOS to CentOS Stream, flat out.
Yeah, it's as I mentioned, I just noticed that Oracle have put up. I think this is a page that they've put up. I don't know if you want to share this. It looks like they've put a lot of marketing money behind this. At least $5 for this page to be put together. But This is effectively one of your options these days.
Yeah, share screen. Oh, private chat. Got you. I'm on you. I'm on you. Oh. Yeah.
Yeah, this is it.
$5.
Oracle's big moment to shine, and they've quickly put this together. But yeah, as I mentioned, kind of these are your options at the moment.
I remember when Oracle Linux came out. I was with Red Hat. Happened about 12 years ago, and we got a lot of support calls. I was in support first, and we got a lot of calls for RHEL, of course, but we would get a lot of calls for CentOS and Oracle Linux. And every time for Oracle Linux and for CentOS, of course, we would have to be like, that's not RHEL.
Yeah.
And they kind of seem to go by the wayside, but that's just,
That's
just.
I guess then this kind of brings us on
shady.
to what the future is. Do you think this is going to massively impact RHEL subscriptions? Will this cause a flood of people to look at other distributions? Will SUSE, I don't know, the little green gecko.
The green yeah.
I mean, there's a good question there from Mackay. Ephemeral computing, mutable operating systems, etc. Do we still need enterprise Linux? Well, unfortunately, yes, because large institutions need to have a supported operating system. They need to go back to their board of executives and say that there are SLAs on things. They need to have signed contracts that in the event of failure, somebody is to blame, and somebody will throw their best engineers at fixing these problems. So this is why RHEL exists, because big institutions need to be able to have the required support. They need to be able to say that should they have an outage, that the company that I'm paying this money to will come and fix this outage within these slots. And I think that's going to be the way for quite some time. And even for platforms to run your containers on, containers can die and be restarted elsewhere, but the operating systems need to stay up, even if the containers themselves are dying and crashing and things like that. So today, the OS still is important, and you can see that in RHEL subscriptions.
Yeah, I kind of wish I was a fly on the wall over at Red Hat, but I'm also kind of glad I'm not. Yeah, so there are governments and banks and other financial institutions, massive companies that aren't going to touch containers for years, are not doing DevOps, are still doing things very much the old-fashioned way, that are still on RHEL 6 and CentOS 6, frankly, because their upgrade policy is so full of red tape, sadly. So it is still, the operating system is still very much important for people, I think, more for people who don't use containers and whatnot, as well as for the use case you said. Absolutely. There will always be an underlying operating system for where the containers exist. And yeah, security and policy ultimately and supportability is what it comes down to.
Yep. Being able to promise the behavior to your shareholders, to your board of executives, all of this kind of plays into the reasons why you have to go down these paths and have these very large contracts, signed agreements, SLAs, financial penalties, all of that sort of stuff.
Exactly. Well,
Wish I put a suit in for this bit.
I know, right? Yeah, so my heart's kind of broken and I'm stressed for a lot of people. But I'm also supportive for a lot of people, and especially my friend who reached out last night. I'm thinking of you. And let us know how we can help. You know, Equinix Metal is more about the hardware, but we do offer CentOS as one of our operating systems, supported operating systems, and I don't know what we're going to do either. Maybe we'll start having a stream image. Maybe we'll start having, I don't know. We'll just be playing. So let us know what you want us to experiment with and how we can help. And yeah. So thanks for joining me, Dan. And Makai, who's like super
hiding in the wings.
Comments. And I hope you all have a great rest of your Wednesday. Thanks for joining on your low Wi-Fi Wednesday, which is yes, exactly. So Dan's even sending me extra stuff. I'm going to let you go enjoy the rest of your morning, maybe actually get a cup of coffee or tea. Thanks for joining, Dan. Oh, I totally just cut you off. I'm sorry. We do have... I love it. Makai is still giving me awesome comments. I do want to share this particular link that Dan sent me right before, which comes from, it actually comes from, oh no, it doesn't come from before the announcement. Nope. JK. Stop screen. Share screen. Chrome tab. There we go. Share. So this is from the 11th of December because American switched the date, and has a couple of recommendations for what options to do. So stream. Oh, and it even goes into RHEL from Fedora, CentOS Stream from RHEL, blah, 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 and then what we're actually going to be doing. So Oracle Linux is listed there, and then Cloud Linux. I have never heard of this. A one-to-one replacement for CentOS in Q1 in 2021. Wow. Separate, totally free operating system. Cool. And then Springdale. See, this is exactly what I was saying before. Scientific Linux is the one that was deprecated in favor of CentOS. It's specifically made for the academic scientific community, and it's still actively maintained. Might be an option for the National Accelerator Laboratories like CERN and Fermi. And then Rocky Linux, which is what Makai just said. It's a concept, not an actual distribution. So that's kind of new. Oh, and this is Greg Kurtzer. So this is the actual one that Dan mentioned, a co-founder was talking about doing. So it literally, let's see what the repo looks like. Oh, it's coming. Oh. Well, I like just from reading, the 2 seconds of these, Springdale is what I have the most enthusiasm for. But yeah, we'll see what actually works out. As I said, much thanks to Dan Finneran, to David Mackay, and thank you to, if you joined us, let us know if, does HPE have a CentOS alternative? That's a great question. That's also Dan, by the way. I don't know. HPE CentOS alternative. 17 hours ago, ZDNet.com also asked if there was a alternative, and there seems to be a open. Oh no, that's for OpenVMS. That's a great question. Yeah. CentOS users, shall we say, were not amused. Millions of users have been using CentOS as a stable point distribution for their servers, virtual machines, and appliances. Yeah. The ZDNet is saying, let me share my screen. Lists Ubuntu, of course, RHEL, CentOS, CentOS Stream, Oracle Linux, Amazon Linux. Okay, there's Cloud Linux again, and Rocky Linux again, and there is HPE's HPE Clear OS. Wow. HPE's main selling point for Clear OS is that it has ready to go right out of the box. Free Home Edition and Business Edition. Oh, dang. Good call, Dan. And then there's Springdale and Scientific Linux, but yeah, Fermilabs. Well, clearos.com. Yeah. Well, I was going to end this at 10:30, but we don't need to. Screw that. Just keep going. Yeah, ClearOS. Yeah. So there's a lot going down. Let us know what you think. Join us in... Wait. Actually, I don't know if I have our community Slack link ready to go. Join us in our Slack. Let me know if you're keen to talk about this. We'd love to hear your thoughts. You can also post in the comments wherever you're viewing this: YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, Periscope, or Facebook. And yeah, good luck. Let us know how we can help. Take care.